thank you for being here with us today. As you know, agriculture is Georgia's top industry. We know last year posed numerous challenges for Georgia producers. We're excited to hear directly from Congressman Austin Scott and Agricultural Chairman David Scott about current federal proposals and potential short and long-term impacts to our agricultural industry. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Chairman Scott, this question's for you. Could you start off sharing some information about some of your current priorities as the new chairman of the Agriculture Committee? What opportunities you see for Georgia producers, and then also what are some of the challenges that you see for our producers across the state?
Well, first of all, let me start with we have got to move with all deliberate speed to make sure that we have established rural broadband connection to our internet. There is no single issue that is more important right now for the nation, but particularly our agriculture industry. Technology is now revolutionizing the production of food, our increase, precision, being able to grapple with the next biggest issue, which is climate change. You just take those two issues. Those are two that we've got to really put at the front of the spear. And we have done that. My first two hearings were on closing the rural divide, making sure that we can get to those 24 million of our American citizens living in rural areas to make sure they're connected. So we had a wonderful hearing on that. I'm sure Austin can reflect on that as well. And we're moving in that in a very strong bipartisan way, where I'm working closely with my ranking member Thompson on this. And I want to put together a bill. And when I brought them in, we got to move. We got to be bold. And we can't wait on trying to fit it into the president's move on infrastructure. Infrastructure has so many different definitions for whatever one wants to do. Climate change, the same thing. I have all respect for anybody who wants to talk about the Green New Deal. That's your situation, renewable fuels, all of that is in the jurisdiction of every congressman's priority. But mine is to make sure this nation and the Congress address climate change from the standpoint of the farmer and our agriculture industry. Nobody suffers or benefits from climate and weather like agriculture and our farmers. And if we moved and combined these two, climate change and rural broadband, you'll see what I'm talking about. Climate change right now, the biggest thing that we've got to do is to get regeneration moving, to be able to find effective ways to sequestering the carbon in the air. It belongs in the ground, getting it back. This is God-given to us. Our food, our entire existence on this planet comes from the rain, water we get from heaven, and the dirt there. Everything is there for us. Our food we eat, the clothes we wear, our shelter, our water, all of that. And once we explain to people, and then we need to explain the magnificent and powerful economic force that agriculture has. And when I tell people, I say, do you know that 44 of our 50 states, 44 of the economies of the 50 state economies, the number one part of it is agriculture. And we have got to be bold and recognize that. And that's why I have put that in. And then we also are going to have to do something here to put these racial discrimination charges behind us. And so we had a wonderful hearing on that. We had a Bill Sagan who, incidentally, so many of these racial charges were laid at the feet of Secretary Vilsack and the USDA. And so that was very important, bring him in. And we did wonderful. It was an historic hearing. And so we're moving now on getting legislation to address really what is the fundamental issue here. It's two things: making sure we identify what our Black farmers have brought to us as examples of discrimination, put them in the legislation, prohibit them, and put strong punishments in there for if these practices ever raise their ugly head again, and the person that is doing that. Therefore, our Black farmers, they will know that we responded. But here's what else we have to do. Because as I shared with many of my friends, and Austin and I have had great discussions on this, I don't ever want us to ever be in a position again where we have to bail out farmers or Black farmers because they can't pay their loans back. And so we want to creatively put in this bill a tax benefit. This is historically has been done throughout our history to give incentives to those marketers, those food processors, those storage unit, those middle people who go and purchase the goods and the products from our Black farmers. So they have some incentives to increase. So the reason why we had to bail the Black farmers out, they couldn't make money from selling their goods. So we want this bill to disavow all those racial discriminations, but also find some creative ways in which we can increase the market share. And then finally, disaster aid. I tell you, and Austin Scott and I worked our buns off on this issue of disaster aid. And you know, after Michael down there in Georgia, it just broke my heart that our Georgia farmers, some didn't get the help down in years. We had a high suicide rate among our farmers because they couldn't get it. I was born on a farm. I know what that farm means to the heart, the soul of families. That's all they got. And when they saw we couldn't get aid down to them, and particularly our dairy farmers around the country, family farms. And so we want to be able to create another bill that we can set up an independent funding mechanism away from the regular appropriations process, because it takes too long, where we can get that aid down to our farmers immediately. We got a pattern of that in the CCC up here. If we can do it in the CCC, we can do it for our farmers. So that sort of gives you a nutshell. And let me just say what an experience it has been to work with my colleague there, Austin Scott. And I can assure you, Georgia's in good hands when it's in hands of the Scott brothers.
Well, thank you, Chairman. A lot of big things going on in the Agricultural Committee, and we're glad you're there as chairman, and certainly proud to have a Georgian and respect the work that you're doing. Congressman Austin Scott, I mean, he brought up, disaster relief, and we want to, again, thank you for the work you did there from our industry, on behalf of the Agribusiness Council. Thank you. We know you're worked hard and tirelessly on that, and probably have a lot of tread left on your tires had that hurricane not come through the state, but thank you for that work. Along those same lines, Congressman Austin Scott, what trends are you seeing in your district regarding agribusiness and the farmers there in your district? What are you seeing that they're doing to kind of bolster their long-time resiliency? There's been a lot of things thrown at our farmers in the last couple of years. What are you seeing they're doing to make sure that they're in it for the long haul?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to thank David Scott. He's been a great friend for a long time. Congressman Bishop, the other members from they got hit with Hurricane Michael. It was an all-out team effort, and we couldn't have done it without the university systems and the others that were providing us the information on the losses. And so it was a team effort. And it took a little longer to get it done than we should have. And I think David's right that through the Commodity Credit Corporation, we can do some things to set up for immediate disaster relief when you have something like a Hurricane Michael. He's right on the rural broadband issue. One of the things that I want to see on rural broadband is I want to see our funds. I want to make sure that our funds for rural America are kept inside the USDA, because once funds leave the USDA and they go to something like the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, for example, Metro America seems to end up with those funds. So we're both very protective of making sure the funds stay in USDA to go to rural America. The thing that we're starting to see now that concerns us is you've got a lot of inflation on your input cost in agriculture. You've got a tremendous labor shortage right now. The unemployment benefits are in many cases higher than the wages that were paid for some of the labor. That has created a shortage of labor for many of our farmers. And the talk about taking away stepped up basis, as you know, farming is a family business, and when the parents pass away, obviously leaving the land to the next generation is extremely important to them. And so if you look at the estate tax proposals that are out there, to take away stepped up basis and to increase the federal estate taxes by dropping the estate tax threshold, that's extremely concerning to them. A lot of concern about the environmental related issues and what President Biden and Secretary Vilsack's proposal on the land to be set aside for environmental purposes actually means in the long run to the farmer. So there are a tremendous number of tax and environmental concerns out there. And in the end, farming is a business. It's about cash flow. It's input cost, come out of your revenue. And while commodity prices are up right now, so are the input costs. And one of the things that I think we on the Ag Committee have got to pay very close attention to is that inflation is here. It's not around the corner, it's here. And if you take a price of what you're paying at the grocery store today on the normal things, not the fancy things, the bread, the milk, the cheese, if you take a picture of what you're paying today and you take a picture of what you're paying 6 months from now, I think you're going to see a significant difference. And that inflation hurts those who have the least among us the most. And so I'm very concerned about what we see with inflation. And obviously we've got to stay out there with the research. The talk of the lately about has been coronavirus with regard to something that we hadn't seen in the past that hit the country. But, we have to watch very carefully what comes into this country from the standpoint of whether it be seed or whether it be animals or other things, and the potential contamination of, the raw materials and the input costs and the inputs that we use in agriculture to produce the product that feeds America and the rest of the world.
Thank you, Congressman. And I appreciate that answer. And then specifically, talking about the stepped up basis, I mean, that's one thing that scares our industry the most. And you think about protecting the family farm, the small family farm, that could be detrimental to us. So I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. Another thing y'all both touched on is predictable labor. Labor is a huge issue for us in agriculture. It's one of the largest things that impacts our competitiveness with other countries. Certainly there's been a lot of talk over the years on trying to get some legislation passed, but there's actually some pieces of legislation that are moving through Congress now. And I want to give both of you the opportunity to talk about it. Chairman Scott, give us a little bit of insight on what you see as far as labor issues in agriculture and any of the bills that y'all are working on.
Well, labor is critical to our industry in agriculture. And we got to have the labor there to do the planning as well as the harvesting. And we got to make sure that the compensation is there. And we got to make sure that supply is there over a continuous period. Now, our House Agriculture Committee does not have the exact jurisdiction over agricultural workforce. That rests more in the administration committee headed up by our good friend, Congress Lady Chairman Zoe Leffron. And I've worked very closely with her. We had a bill that we did get through, which I believe I co-sponsored that bill, spoke on that bill. And I think that for right now, I think we're fine. But I'm gonna be honest with you, we're going to have to really come to a very serious understanding in terms of our migratory policies. Much of the labor force could be available, has been historically, from our immigrant population. And so we have to have a good balance here and make sure that the people we have coming into this country are going to be helpful, going to be useful. But we're also going to have to really examine our porous border, because in the process, you got to make sure that you have a very good process of those who are coming in, that want to work with us, that want to contribute, and a way in which we can screen out some of the bad elements that are taking advantage of our kindness, our generosity. But agriculture must play a leadership role in that particular aspect of our labor force. And Zoe and I have had many conversations on that. This is not an issue just popping its head. I've been here 19 years, and we, in my own estimation, have not dealt with the immigratory nature of our agriculture or potential agricultural workforce with the sense of economics that our agriculture industry needs to be at the forefront of making sure that our labor force has a continuing stream. And we got to develop better relationships in terms of some of the areas where a lot of our labor force is coming from, to make sure we have better relationships with some of these countries that are south of the border there. I just see that as a major challenge, but I think we got a very good workforce we got going, but also in terms of labor and land, we are getting what we call precision agriculture now, where technology is moving in and giving us more effective and efficient ways to produce the quantity of food we need with the use of technology. But then that goes back to our farmers not being able to use that if they're not connected to the internet. So we got a lot of dynamics working here, but I think we're in good shape now, but we got to keep our eye on the ball in terms of the immigration aspect to make sure that agriculture, our farmers' needs go well plenished in terms of having a continuous source of labor, because our business in agriculture is the most labor-intensive industry we got.
Thank you, Chairman. Congressman Austin Scott, would you like to add anything to the conversation regarding labor?
Well, there are multiple issues here. One is, the challenge with the U.S. labor force right now is that with the expanded unemployment benefits, they're making well over $15 an hour not working. And as someone who spent their teenage years on the farm, it's pretty hard work. And I made minimum wage back in those days, and a lot of people simply are choosing not to work, unfortunately, in America today. And that's we saw the jobs report this past week, and I think a lot of that is a reflection on how generous the unemployment benefits have come. And so that's something that's going to have to be addressed. I mean, if someone's offered a job and they don't go back to work, those unemployment benefits should be stopped, and they should be stopped immediately. The other thing that has happened with some of the immigrant labor, and understand this, most of the farmers try to do it right and try to follow the law. Many of the farmers in my area bring in people from South Africa when they get into planting season, and you've got certain areas where, because of COVID and COVID outbreaks, we were not allowing immigration from those countries unless you could get a waiver. Well, if you're outside of agriculture, you might not recognize that most of the time it's the same people that come back on an annual basis to work on your farm. And so if you're used to bringing in somebody from somewhere, and they've been working with you, every year for the past 5, 6, 7 years, and then all of a sudden you can't bring them in because of a COVID outbreak in that country, that creates tremendous turmoil on the inputs and getting the crop in the ground in a timely manner. And look, I mean, you don't get it planted in a timely manner, you don't get to harvest it at all. And so there's been some unique challenges that we've seen because of COVID, and those are areas where we've got to be able to work through that. And whether it's requiring vaccinations for them to come into the country, quarantine when they come into the country, or other things, we've got to find some flexible solutions to work with our ag producers to make sure that we're able to get that labor force in here. When it comes to the harvesting of the crops and areas where you see a large number of immigrant laborers working at the same time, picking cucumbers, squash, vegetables, the other things that we all depend on and want to walk into the grocery store and see. What we need is more flexibility with regard to that workforce. If your crop, if you have that workforce scheduled to be here, for a certain timeline, and your crop doesn't hit the timeline where it needs to be harvested, in that bracket, and farmers are pretty good at timing these things. But if something happens and you have colder weather than expected, and the crop ends up being, a week later, 10 days later, you need some flexibility in whether or not you can keep that workforce here on that farm to get those vegetables picked. And so it's a separate issue from what we see at the border. The border issue is very serious, but ag labor is a separate issue. One of the primary concerns with the last bill was the wage rate in that piece of legislation, and that's the reason I think you saw people vote against it, was the increased wage rates that were put in there.
Well, thank you, Congressman. On behalf of the Georgia Chamber and the Georgia Agribusiness Council, I'd like to thank both of y'all for taking the time today to speak with us. Certainly, agriculture has some really big issues that we're working on, and we appreciate you two guys working together, and the Scott brothers, as you said, Chairman. We appreciate y'all's work and being able to work across the aisle, because agriculture issues shouldn't be partisan. They're big issues. They impact everyone. Everyone wants to eat 3 meals a day. So we know how big these issues are, and we appreciate everything that y'all have done to work on those. And so we just like to say thank you for joining us today.
Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.